In terms of some other fun stuff, my colleague Greg Gosicki ran a really cool number of studies looking at how exercise actually alters the gut microbiome. And this is actually an area that I probably have 300 stool samples sitting in my freezer in my lab.
Oh, goodness. Another reason to pause before entering your lab.
Yeah, another reason to not apply to come be one of my graduate students, unless you want to deal with that. We actually have a number. We've applied for a couple of grants to look more into this, specifically with females. So hopefully we can get that funded. But nonetheless, you can actually see some like pretty traumatic, and I say that word on purpose, changes in the gut microbiome. This one in particular study I was thinking of that Greg did is he looked at the changes pre, post, and ultra marathon. And even within a single bout of exercise, I can't remember some of the markers, but I know one of the markers was specifically increased by like 14,000% after a single bout of exercise. Now, this is an ultra marathon. This is like totally absurd amount of exercise relative to what normal people would be. But that number, I remember, like it was like 14,229% or like some random number like that.
Of something meaningful?
Yeah, something meaningful. I can't remember which marker that was. That had changed. I know streptococcus was in there. Streptococcus went up like maybe something more like 30 or 40 or 50%. So the point is, we haven't even had the proper time, and we don't, to even launch into the gut microbiome. Supplementation there needs to be ultra specific. You wouldn't be best served to just jump in and take random things there. It's a whole area of emerging science. We know very, very, very little about it, but there is a number of actionable things one could do there. So probably something to not mess with. Would certainly work with a qualified physician if you think you have something going on clinical or some actual problem there. Don't work with someone who's not a specialist, a medical doctor there, but just randomly assigning a bunch of probiotics or prebiotics without intention is maybe the next forefront of human performance research, but we'll have to maybe come back in a few years and dive into that in detail, or perhaps you can bring somebody on as an expert in that to discuss that.
Yeah, gut microbiome is fascinating. I think of sleep as the most powerful performance-enhancing activity. Of course, you still have to do the activity.
Yeah.
I consider it foundational. Like it basically raises the tide on mental health, physical health, performance of all kinds. There's recent data that during sleep, your body goes through all its various forms of metabolism possible.
Yep.
Which is amazing. So it's measured from breath in human subjects, breath metabolites in human subjects. So obviously, if one is thinking about supplementation and wondering, okay, what's the best supplement to enhance performance? You gave some great rationale for why creatine would be an excellent choice, provided you're eating well and hydrating well. And then, to my mind, the next thing on the list would be anything that allows you to improve the quality and maybe even the duration of your sleep. Although if you wake up and you feel rested throughout the day and only need a short nap in the afternoon, not everyone needs one, but then generally that means you're feeling okay. People sometimes get flipped onto this idea that they have insomnia. Insomnia is excessive daytime sleepiness where you're falling asleep during the day. That's insomnia. Could also be narcolepsy, but that's insomnia. But supplementation to improve the quality or duration of sleep, or both, seems to me like the most direct route, even though actually technically it's an indirect route to performance enhancement. And then thinking about things that increase alertness and stimulants and fatigue reducers. Do you think that's a good logic?
Yeah, we go to absurd lengths to dial sleep in as much as we can. I mean, the honest answer is like truly absurd. This is a conflict of interest that my company, I'm a part of this, Absolute Rest is the name of that company. We actually go out to your house and run a full clinical grade sleep study in your bedroom on you, and run that over multiple nights. So instead of having to go to a sleep clinic and have it done in this weird hospital room or sort of setting with these people looking at you through a mirror, it's like totally creepy. That is important because that's the only way to truly determine how you are sleeping. Now, that said, the technology of wearable trackers is getting better. In fact, I would actually predict those things will reach a level of accuracy equivalent to the PSG in the next couple of years, and probably will get FDA approval to be able to diagnose officially sleep disorders. That's my prediction from some inside information. I don't know that to be true, but it is getting a lot better. Right now, those wearables are not accurate enough to meet that threshold. So what we do is we bring out basically all the equipment to do that. So we'll come in and do that. Now, once we understand exactly how you're sleeping, The next question is to answer, why are you sleeping that way? And so this is a full fourfold system. Number one is we're going to look at biology, which means we're going to take saliva and blood, and we're looking at everything from neurotransmitters, concentrations, to vitamins, B6, B12, et cetera, that are important for sleep performance. So we're going to see, is it a physiological problem? Is there something happening there? Is cortisol DHEA ratio that we've previously talked about, or is something like that off? If it's not physiology, then we're going on the next one, which is environmental. We run a full environmental scan of your bedroom during those nights of sleep that we're there. And that's really important because we can look at everything from dander and pollen and allergens that are in the air. A quick tip here is wash your sheets at least once a week. One of the most common places that people get allergens in the air is actually from accumulation on your sheets. So if you clean those more often, you'll be in a better spot. The next one there also is like I'm sorry, this hurts my heart. In truthfulness, I violate this, but keep your pets out of your bedroom and certainly keep them off your bed. Our Ghostface Killer is my dog, and Nelky's my other one. They don't go on my bed, but they're right next to my bed. So we violate that one. But full environmental scan includes all those things. Of course, we measure light and temperature and humidity and everything else that's going on in the room. Volatile organics that are coming out of the mattress, formaldehyde, lead out of the wall, like all of these things that could potentially disrupt your sleep. And we want to make sure that none of those things are kicking on. We see this constantly. People will have things like trying to be cool, and they want to be cold at night because that's important. And so they'll turn an air conditioner on or a fan, but the air conditioner kicking on and off at night actually can shoot you out of various sleep stages. So you want to be really careful how that's going. The last metric on that is actually CO2. And so what you remember from our metabolism discussion is when you exhale, you're breathing out CO2. Well, if your room is closed and the ventilation isn't great, the amount of CO2 in your room starts to build up. And we actually very specifically know the threshold based on information collected from the International Space Station, actually. We know the threshold at which CO2 crosses and starts disrupting sleep. So we want to make sure that you're not sitting in this CO2 bath in front of your face and then breathing it back in and disrupting your sleep. So environment is the second one. The third one is actually now psychology. So one of the members on our team is a Harvard MD in psychiatry and put together an entire sleep scan survey. So we run through all that to see if there's anxiety, depression, anything like that psychologically going on. And then the fourth one there is if you have some sort of actual sleep pathology. And so this again will include some eye tracking stuff that we can use. So we take all those data, they go back to our team. We work in combination with Steve Lockheed from Harvard, who's done a ton of stuff. He actually set up a lot of the circadian rhythm stuff in the International Space Station as well. Himself, Jeffrey Drummer, an MD, PhD, et cetera. And all of these folks in a room go over your data, identify what's going on, and build action plans off of that. Occasionally, those action plans will include supplementation, but only if necessary. We're really going to try to come back and work through a system to improve the sleep however is needed. So I realize that is not totally accessible for a lot of people, but like if you really need to go to the end of the earth to figure out sleep, that service is available.
Absolute Rest sounds like an amazing tool, given that most people won't be able to use it or access it, although we will provide a link in case people are interested in it and do want to try it. You mentioned a few things that I think everyone should assay their sleeping environment for and determine whether or not they are hindering their sleep without realizing it. For instance, the air conditioning going on and off, or this could be heater going on and off, or central heating or cooling unit. This could be keeping the room dark. This could be cleaning your sheets. Certainly that doesn't require that one sign up for Absolute Rest. So cleaning one's sheets routinely, keeping pets out of the bedroom, as you admitted you don't entirely. Different opinions about that, but if you're having sleep issues, the dander from animals may be part of those issues. And then one that I'll just add, which I think is pretty interesting, is there's some beautiful data out of Michael Terman's lab at Columbia Medical School in New York on negative ionization. And this sounds pretty wacky, kind of new agey. I'm sure some people are like, no, negative ionization, but listen, the Terman lab is a serious laboratory focused on circadian biology for many decades now. Negative ion concentrations are higher near coastal locations. So if you've ever gone to the sea or gone on vacation and you sleep better near a body of water, that's actually a real thing. And there are negative ionization machines, but there are also some things that one can do in order to increase the negative ion concentration in their sleeping environment that are nearly zero cost, if not zero cost. You can look those up online, and we probably will do an entire episode about this in the future. But I think what you describe for absolute rest really highlights a more general set of themes that I think are really important, which is your sleep environment is an environment. It's got a lot going on in it, and it's worth running through the checklist that you described and asking, where things, maybe not optimized, but where am I really getting in my own way in terms of sleep? All of this, again, being related to the fact that getting excellent sleep consistently is will completely transform everything that you do, and not getting excellent sleep consistently, which is a challenge for so many people, will also transform everything that you do and think and feel, but in the negative direction.
Yeah, I can also offer a few tips on sleep based on things we find most consistently for those that can't go through the whole protocol. One quick little app called Time Shifter is really cool for anyone that's dealing with consistent travel and jet lag. So you can go and enter your location, your time, where you're going, with the location, and then it'll actually back calculate and it'll give you full light, stimulant, food, hydration, and stuff protocol, and you just follow along with that. And we've used that for many years, actually, especially when traveling to like Abu Dhabi for fights and Mongolia and Brazil for the Olympics and sort of all over the place. So I think that app is still available. I hope so. It's great. A nice tool. A couple of things we found major. If you're dealing with acid reflux, so if you're someone who has problems like that, you can just elevate the head of your bed by like 6 inches. So if you put a little piece of wood or something underneath it, you can also buy very inexpensive pillows that can elevate that. Now, that's not solving the problem, but at least can help you sleep, whether it's just that night or if it's a consistent problem, you can do there. If you're snoring, like I said, that's not really benign. You should probably take a look at that. Your first step there is mouth tape. If that doesn't work, you can go through what's called myofunctional therapy, which I don't know if you've covered that before, but it's basically tongue exercises. And that can be quite effective, specifically for people who have problems with REM sleep. So myofunctional therapy, it's kind of like you do, like, depending on the protocol, some tongue exercises kind of in the morning, afternoon, or night. And that takes a while, to be honest. You're probably going to need at least 6 weeks before you start seeing anything. But that actually is pretty well demonstrated to help with sleep. So you can probably Google, we could find a link for exact protocols. I don't want to describe all them, but yeah, you're going to strengthen your tongue so that it stops falling in the back of your neck and waking you up at night. So that's a really easy free protocol to use. If you're struggling with, it could be insomnia, but it could be just things like when you get into bed, you're super tired and you can't fall asleep or things like that. Kind of a basic rule of thumb we use is only 2 things happen in your bed. And if you can make sure those are the only 2 things you do in your bed, the problems of falling asleep or insomnia tend to go down. Those 2 things are you have sex and you sleep, and nothing else goes down in your bed. And so you can make that environment very special, and that can help quite effectively improve your ability to fall asleep and then not wake up early. So keeping that environment specific to what it's for can be effective. The only other thing I would think of is, and I hate to say this because it's not super practical, but it's just quite clear at this point, sleeping with a partner in your bed, it's just not very good for sleep. So
good luck with that one.
I know. You can do a couple of things if it helps. You can get 2 smaller beds and put them right next to each other. If you can actually have separate sheets, that alone can be helpful. So if you get, if you're on a king size bed or something, and again, I know some people, they're just like, there's no chance, but if you want to know the cost for your, like, the effective
you can end your relationship.
You can just lose your loved one. Ideally,
please don't. Well, oh my goodness.
So the only last thing I want to mention here is something that's popped up just a few times recently, but you're going to see more of, which is called orthosomnia. So that is a term that people are growing concerned over, which is wearables and sleep trackers causing sleep issues. So people basically become too obsessed with optimizing, maximizing scores, and that alone, you learn when to wake up, and so you have actually an anticipatory response when many hours prior to waking up. So if you actually learn to have a little bit of what's that little molecule of like excitement and reward? Oh, dopamine. That's the one. If you start getting that because you wake up and you get super excited to check your score, Or your phone. It's the same thing if you check your phone or Twitter or whatever in the immediately morning. That'll actually start carving back your wake up time because you start launching it. So it can ruin sleep becoming too obsessed. So what I'll say is if you're going to use a sleep tracker and you just like don't care, you want to check it and you have fun with it, great. But if like you are really, really, really interested in it and you pay a lot of attention to it, don't check your sleep score for at least the first 60 minutes after waking up. And then that should help you.
That's a great tool. I think they'll, and piece of advice, I think generally, because I think a lot of people are waking up in the middle of the night, checking their phone 2 or 3 times per night. I'm kind of wondering why they're doing that. And I'm guessing it's this anticipatory wake up circuit.
Yeah, you absolutely should use either your night mode or do not disturb or airplane mode or something overnight.
Or leave it out of the room.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to wake up and like some people have like a family member who's maybe not in great health and so they have to keep their phone around in case they call or things like that. So I get it. You're like, I can't leave it out. Leave it in there, leave it in, do not disturb, and enter in their phone number or whoever's phone number so only they can get through. But keep it black and white. So if you do have to look at your phone at night, you see black and white and you do not have notifications. So make sure that there's no notification for no email and a no DM. Like get all that stuff off your screen. And so you look at did anybody call? Did anybody text of importance? What time is it? No emergency going on, black and white. Okay, right back to sleep. So that can help a little bit.
One of the supplements that I found is extremely useful for being able to fall back asleep if I've woken up in the middle of the night and for some reason can't, and is also very effective for enhancing sleep when one is ingesting fewer carbohydrates, an issue that a lot of people run into, or for people that are fasting for many hours before sleep. People are trying to not eat anything within 2 to 4 hours, but is inositol, 900 milligrams of myo-inositol. I find, again, this is anecdata to be clear, that if I wake up in the middle of the night and I've taken 900 milligrams of inositol before initially falling asleep, that I fall back asleep much more easily. So that's why I've added 900 milligrams of inositol to my so-called sleep stack. I've also tried just taking it alone, and it works well alone, but it works better, of course, with the MAG-3 and 8 apigenin and theanine sleep stack. Also, in terms of tools for sleep, the app Reverie that was developed by my colleague, Dr. David Spiegel, who's a medical doctor at Stanford School of Medicine Psychiatry. There is a free trial. There's a nominal cost if you use it month to month, but the data are really strong that people that use that, I think it's 8 to 11 minute sleep hypnosis once a week, and it doesn't have to be in the middle of the night when you wake up, really helps improve people's ability to fall asleep quickly, stay asleep, fall back asleep if they wake up in the middle of the night. In some cases, curing insomnia. In other cases, really just helping people with their general sleep issues. And I mention this because obviously it's a technology, it's not a supplement, but I know that some people are supplement averse. Also, if you look at the cost comparison between taking the sleep stack and the Reverie app, it's pennies on the dollar, really. So again, I'm a proponent of both for myself, but I realize that people have varying budgets. And again, I should say, as always, behavioral tools first. And I think of the Reverie app as more or less a behavioral tool.
Yeah, it's really just a tool. Any of these breathwork protocols, hypnosis protocols, they're just a tool for you to touch back in with your own physiology rather than a substance that's coming in. So I fully support those. We have used a number of those in protocols. There's some other tricks that we can pull in those areas. I probably shouldn't say this, but the reality of it is, depending on what's keeping you up, sometimes we recommend just getting up and getting it done. Like if it's a project or a thing or whatever, like sometimes rather than laying there all night not sleeping, you can get up, get it done, and then if you stay awake, fine. At least the anxiety's gone. Or sometimes you can actually go back to sleep because you're like, especially if the task only literally would take like 10 or 15 minutes. It may ruin your sleep, but you're going to have ruined sleep anyways. So you can try that tool. You don't want to pull that card very often, and you have to be very careful with what you consider to be something worthy of doing that. But that is like between me and you and nobody else here. That's a tool I have used personally more than a few times, where it's just like I get an idea and I don't lose it, or like the solution for something you've been noodling on for a long time pops in your head, and just like, and you're not wanting to forget it. Just get up, get it done, and get on with your day.
In several previous episodes, you emphasized how exercise induces various adaptations depending on the type, specificity, volume, intensity, etc. of the exercise. And that during exercise, the degree of adaptation that one triggers is often associated with things that normally we don't associate with exercise-related health, things like huge increases in blood pressure during exercise, huge increases in inflammatory markers, muscle damage, right? These things all sound terrible, but as you beautifully explained, all of that triggers adaptations that then bring those markers below the baseline with which they were previous to the exercise. So that's the adaptation and the recovery. Within the realm of supplementation and nutrition, I'm aware of a number of things, some herbal, some lipid-based, other compounds that are used for various things, but that are known to have a potent anti-inflammatory effect. Things like omega-3 fatty acids, ashwagandha for its effect on cortisol, although that's a bit indirect to the inflammatory pathway, curcumin, and things of that sort. Given that we want inflammation in order to trigger the adaptation response to exercise, and given that we want to reduce inflammation in the recovery period, can we put together a logical framework as to when is best to take anything anti-inflammatory, whether it's supplement-based or prescription or over-the-counter drug, and when to strictly avoid taking any anti-inflammatory supplement or a behavioral tool? You mentioned ice can reduce inflammation. That's why you don't want to do it too close to exercise. Anyway, I think you get the gist of the question. What about specific supplements related to inflammation and anti-inflammatory responses? What are the best ones? When should we take them? When should we avoid taking them?
The way that I think about it is understanding what we call the fitness fatigue model. So what I mean by that is whenever you do some sort of insult, the whole idea is for you to come back and get an adaptation. Now, recovery is not adaptation, right? Recovery is recovery. Adaptation is what happens after you're recovered, right? So there's a very important distinction there. Fitness fatigue model says basically you've done something and you've got an adaptation and you've enhanced fitness. And by fitness, in this case, I mean it as a non-specific term. So you got stronger, you've improved your endurance, like whatever thing you're trying to train for. At the same time, though, your fatigue elevated. So what happens is if fitness increases at the same or similar rate as fatigue, your performance actually isn't any better. And so you may think, oh, my program isn't working. I need to then train harder, or I need to take more anti-inflammatory, or whatever the things are. When in reality, all you really need to do is reduce fatigue. And if you do that, your performance will increase and all the training adaptations will be actualized. So the way that we do that is a couple of things. First and foremost is actually a taper. So the first step I think of if someone is training very, very hard and you're not seeing any results, and we want to think about supplementation, before I get there, I want to think about taper and deload. If you're actually training hard and sleep and everything else is taken care of. So just without going too far into taper, some general parameters there. You want to think about a 50% reduction in training volume over the course of about a week for every 8 weeks of training. Super, super rough, right? So if you've been training hard for 3 months for something, you might want to taper for 2 weeks. Something like that, right? It's sort of a rough estimate. That taper, you actually don't need to reduce intensity because intensity is not the driver of fatigue. It tends to be volume. So as long as your volume is reduced by 50%, you can maintain intensity. You can maintain, in fact, I generally would recommend maintaining frequency. So if you're used to working out 4 days a week, keep it 4 days a week. You can go down a little bit in frequency, but if you go down too much in frequency, you actually tend to feel super lethargic. So I wouldn't do that. If you do those things correctly, you can typically see somewhere between like a 3 to 8% improvement in performance within a matter of days. So it's important to do that. We actually ran a study on cross-country runners years ago, testing on a metabolic cart, muscle biopsies, blood, a whole bunch of things. And we did it pre and post 3 weeks of taper. And this was cool because we did this in competitive season. So these were collegiate cross-country runners. And we got them to come to our lab 3 weeks before their conference championship, ran them all through a bunch of testing, biopsied them. They went through their 3-week taper, and then we biopsied them again, and then they went and ran their conference championships and stuff. Well, what happened was they ended up hitting about a 50% reduction because what they did is they took out what we call the junk volume. So they kept their race tempos, high-intensity stuff in there. They kept the recovery stuff, and then that medium pace they just basically reduced. Now, they were terrified, as any endurance runner or endurance athlete or participant would understand. When you take volume away, they tend to get very nervous. And so they didn't like that. But as a result of that, what we saw is their VO2 max, despite the fact that they covered half the mileage, their VO2 max did not go down in 3 weeks of reduced taper. Your fitness is extremely stable. And in fact, once we actually looked at their data, the enzymes in their muscle responsible for oxidative metabolism were maintained. And so you don't have to worry about losing, again, fitness, or we're talking about overall performance, or even oxygen capacity, mitochondrial function, etc. That was all preserved. Obviously, we saw performance go up. What was actually really interesting is we saw, I think it was around a 10% increase in type 2, which are fast twitch, muscle fiber size. So we saw a 10% increase in fast twitch fiber size at the end of 3 weeks of tapering. Now, what you may think is like, wow, I guess tapering is anabolic, but that's probably not what happened. What realistically probably happened was their volume of training was actually causing their fibers to be reduced in size. And then once we removed that fatigue, they just recovered back to normal. So that's a good example of what I'm talking about. Once you remove the fatigue, you can actually see enhancements in performance, not because you're necessarily getting better, but because you're removing the stimuli that's suppressing you. So that being said, the way that you want to think about recovery like this is, although recovery, especially like injury recovery, like seems chaotic, biology is very organized, and there's a very specific 3-step process that you're going to go through for recovery. And then there are different supplements that can help you in each of those 3 areas. So area 1 is basically inflammation. So this is when the cytokine storm comes rolling out. It starts signaling the injuries there, in this case, even if it's muscle damage. It activates the immune system to kick on, and that whole repair process happens there. What you're trying to do effectively, in fact, this is why you probably ever wonder, like, why is inflammation a thing? What you're trying to do is bring in fluid, enhance the size, and increase blood flow in so that you can get nutrients for repair and immune cells and everything like that in the system and get the waste out. So short-term inflammation, even in the case of muscle soreness, is the example we talked about in the previous episode. But any inflammation, it is part of the necessary process. That's why you would not want to take an anti-inflammatory in that state. And so why you also would not want to do things like an ice bath. So in that immediate inflammatory response time window, this is seconds to hours after training, you would want to stay away from things like that. A good option here are things like omega-3s. Good evidence, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 2 to 5 grams total, typically like a 1-to-1 EPA to DHA ratio is fine. Similarly, this is another example of when good doesn't mean more is better. Because, for example, there is actually evidence showing up to 15 grams will harm the immune response. And so you don't just want to be like, man, I'm super sore, I'm training harder, I'm just going to go to 10 grams a day or more and more. You're actually causing yourself more of a problem. So antioxidants, anti-inflammatories are fine. Again, omega-3s in that dosage are a decent thing. You can also do something like 500 milligrams of curcumin 3 times a day. That's going to be enough to keep you in a decent spot. There are some other things that you could look up, maybe some potential benefit for ginger and boswellia and some things like that for inflammation. But unless we're in like very specific circumstances where we have like an injury, we're probably not going to those areas.
I just wanted to highlight one thing that came up in a previous episode. Some, not all people, but some, including myself, are very sensitive to curcumin.
Yep.
It has a very potent effect in reducing DHT, dihydrotestosterone, and leads to all sorts of clamping of testosterone-associated positive things. So I have experienced that myself. I've had people write to me and say, I don't understand. I started taking a supplement. Curcumin's supposed to be a great anti-inflammatory. It flatlined my libido. It took away my drive, and kind of wondering what's going on there. Those people are very likely to be very DHT sensitive. Curcumin, while it's a potent anti-inflammatory, can also potently reduce DHT, but some people tolerate it quite well and are hearing this and probably think that's ridiculous. Well, it's certainly substantiated by the biochemical pathways that curcumin taps into and the known roles of DHT on libido, aggression, power output, etc., and mood. So just be wary that there's no way to predict this. One simply has to figure it out empirically, meaning you have to try and see if you like it or don't. The good news is those negative effects on DHT seem to reverse pretty quickly after ceasing to take curcumin. So just a mention of something that came up in a previous episode, but in case people didn't hear that segment, just wanted to highlight those facts.
Further evidence, I strongly discourage taking anything in the anti-inflammatory, antioxidant realm unless you actually have a reason to do so. If you're waking up and you're like, maybe I'm inflamed, that's probably not a good approach. Right? Let's have a reason to do so. Step 2 is actually what we call proliferation, and that's kind of like the cleanup crew. That's when you're going to be going in there and cleaning out dead cells and debris and misfolded proteins and things like that. At this stage, a fantastic evidence-based supplement is glutamine. Glutamine, 20 grams a day. We typically honestly split it up into 2 dosage, 10 grams morning, 10 grams night. It's a conditional amino acid, which means you can make it, your body can make enough of it at times, and other times you may want to support it. Generally, those conditional times are things like burn victims, high stress situations, or injury, things like that. So there isn't also like a ton of downside to glutamine because it can go through transamination, which means your body can take it and say, like, we don't need anything here for our muscle recovery. Let's make it into something else and use it for whatever else is needed. So it's kind of another one of these like low risk products. It's honestly why you see it in a lot of recovery products. If you're ever wondering, like, what the heck is that in there? I don't need amino acids. And you're thinking it's like for protein synthesis. It's really not. It's because of this. It is beneficial to this proliferation process.
I've been taking glutamine for years. I tend to take it in higher dosages several times throughout the day if I'm ever feeling particularly run down.
Yep.
I know there are decent data, not great, but decent data on the role of glutamine for leaky gut.
Totally.
For offsetting leaky gut. That's getting a little bit into the realm of like not super well substantiated, but in the peer-reviewed literature, but a lot of anecdata and certainly some peer-reviewed work, but not a ton. And then there is also growing interest in the idea that glutamine, because it can trigger activation of the neurons in the gut that signal to the dopamine pathway in the brain, that it can be used to offset sugar cravings. This is kind of an interesting new and emerging theme, which makes sense given the biology of the neurons in the gut that respond to specific amino acids, including glutamine, essential fatty acids, and sugar. And because they respond to any and all 3 of those, any one or combination of those, I should say, to trigger this dopamine response. Some people have taken to a teaspoon or so of glutamine in some water or other drink a couple times throughout the day as a way to reduce their sugar cravings, because what's essentially doing is it's tricking the pathway into activation of those neurons through an alternate ligand receptor interaction.
Right. Also, another interesting point, I'm trying to think right now off the top of my head, I can't think of a time, and I've used glutamine a lot. I can't think of a time where I've ever heard anybody come back with any side effect reports.
I think if you take enough of it, you can get some gastric distress. But of course, you take enough of any powdered substance mixed in water, you're going to get a gastric distress response. And what I've noticed about gastric distress with things like creatine, glutamine, and even protein powders for that matter, I use a high quality whey protein powder routinely, is that if you build up to it over the course of a few days, then you can get away with using much higher dosages without any issue.
Yeah. Beta alanine is the same thing, by the way. We sort of talked about that earlier. If you've ever tried that and you're like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I've just rolled around in grass and my skin is itching everywhere.
Oh, it's that ants under the skin sensation?
Yeah,
Ugh.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
You can just take a little bit of a lower dosage and be fine for the most part. And then you will build up a tolerance to that pretty quickly. So you can up that dosage along the way. So what we will oftentimes do there is start at a dosage that's pretty minimal, like 2 grams. And then every week or so, you can go up another gram until you get to whatever final point you want to be, 5-6 grams a day, whatever. So that's another way you can sort of mitigate that problem. So the third step in this recovery process, after inflammation, proliferation, we're now into remodeling. And this is when you're actually, quote unquote, growing back bigger and stronger. This is where the majority of the repair is actually taking place. And at this point, we're basically playing a micronutrient and macronutrient game, right? By that, I mean, we've talked about basic macronutrients. One thing to pay attention to, oftentimes if people are hurt, whether they had an injury or they've had they're super sore and they are concerned about eating excess calories. They tend to want to eat less food during this process because they're like, I'm not working out so much, so I'm going to eat less calories. Well, one of the things that you have to pay attention to is injury can increase basal metabolic rate by up to 10%. Wow. So what you want to do in general is just take your calories up about 10%. At least that's what I recommend. If that is an extended period of time, then yes, you may put on a slight amount of body fat or something. But if that also means you come back some percentage faster, then it's worth the exchange. So we recommend that. In terms of your carbohydrate or fat split, I'm not super worried about it. My general recommendation is just don't make any major changes relative to what you were doing, right? Keep yourself pretty much in the same spot. In terms of protein, this is the big one. You want to make sure you are absolutely at 1 gram per pound of body weight because we need those amino acids to come in and start helping with recovery.
1 gram of protein per pound of body weight or more, or 1 gram?
Or more, yeah. I mean, there's going to be very little downside to having more. Remember, protein and carbohydrates both stimulate insulin. And remember, insulin is anabolic, and so we're trying to drive this process of recovery. That's why you want both. So you wouldn't want to skimp on carbohydrates in this phase, nor would you want to skimp on protein because you need the activation, the drive into the tissue, as well as the structure. Going back to one of our earlier conversations, and at this point in the week, I honestly can't remember at all what episode we covered this in, but I gave an analogy about making a campfire and using fat and carbohydrates as the wood and the log, and the protein were the metal structure. So you need that supply. If you're trying to bank, if you've cleared out in the previous step damaged proteins and you need to make new ones to recover that process, you have to have the raw supply and material. So you wouldn't want to avoid either one of those things. There's actually some indirect inflammation management that comes from fatty acids, which you actually sort of alluded to earlier. I don't think you need to necessarily go crazy. You don't need to change your fat intake that much. Just don't drop it, depending on where you're at. So if you're a little bit of a higher carb, lower fat person, great. If you're moderate, great. If you're the indirect, if you're a higher fat, lower carb person, awesome. Just don't make an extreme change and try to not be on the extremes of either one of those ratios. But the only specific number to pay attention to, again, is that protein number. And if you go a little bit high or even a lot high, it's totally fine. Just don't go low. So that's the macronutrient portion of remodeling. In terms of micronutrients, to be honest, you just get your bases covered. This is when a basic multivitamin is effective. What you're really trying to look at here are vitamin A and zinc. They actually have independent mechanisms that are helpful here, but those are typically covered in most multivitamins, so we generally just give people a multivitamin. Magnesium has some benefits here. Something like 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight is the dosage you're looking for there. Magnesium citrate probably has the most evidence in terms of this respect, but it doesn't mean, I actually have no reason to think you couldn't use glycinate, or if you're using another form for sleep, that's probably fine. I don't know that for sure, but I can't think of a reason why the other forms of magnesium would all of a sudden not work. So you could probably choose whichever form you like, albeit citrate has probably the most research in this aspect. The only other things you would probably consider here, 3 things. Calcium might be on your list, particularly if you're concerned with some sort of bone injury, and we've sort of gone past like recovery and we're actually like into injury. So you'll see that in recovery products occasionally, and that's why. And then the last 2 ones, of course, are vitamin D, and that's pretty well researched. And then the last one is actually something that can help you if you're at this stage and you still are dealing with a lot of soreness or not, and that is tart cherry juice. And that's actually effective for both DOMS, muscle injury, muscle soreness, and it actually has another benefit of potentially aiding with sleep. So not a bad one to turn to as well. And there's a number of companies that make these things. And then there's actually more ongoing research that I know of on those areas, but promising literature, we'll say.
Not often, but every once in a while on this podcast, I will solicit social media for questions from the audience, or I should say the audience to be, and then ask some of those questions on the fly during the podcast. I did this with Dr. Lex Friedman. I'm going to do it with you. Your goal is to answer each of these questions, certainly not all of them, thousands of them within the last couple of hours, to answer each of these questions in 3 or 4 sentences. I certainly won't be counting the number of sentences that you speak. So just know that if you want to go over a little bit, that's fine. But feel free to refer to your Instagram site at a future time where you might go more in depth, or to refer to a study, or if you like, you can also say pass if you don't think that you can answer the question succinctly enough for this format. And here the goal is not to put you on the spot. The goal is simply to allow the audience to ask some questions directly. And I confess I'm looking at these for the first time. So I'll try and be quick with my reading. Some of these we may have touched on in previous episodes or in this episode even, in which case you can just kind of cue us to the reminder. This is not directly related to supplementation, but it is related to nutrition. And I don't think we touched on this directly. Can we do intermittent fasting, aka time-restricted feeding, with keto and still gain muscle mass?
TBD. I am quite clear such study does not exist. So I don't know. I think I've alluded to before that we did run an intermittent fasting 16-8 hypertrophy study. There was no keto arm. The results of that study, by the time this comes out, will probably be ready, though I'm not sure. So I can't comment on it. I haven't looked at the data. But regarding whether or not if you did that with keto or not, I can't comment scientifically.
Do you ever prescribe the use of GABA supplements?
Well, I can't prescribe anything, to make sure we're clear.
But you're a professor. You can profess.
I can profess. We generally don't spend too much time on GABA, rarely.
Is it okay to weight train fasted, then not break the fast and eat for 3 or 4 hours after training? So in other words, train fasted, I do this, but then also not eat immediately following training and wait another 3 to 4 hours after training.
Once we have our results from our intermittent fasting study back, we will have a better answer here. My general recommendation as it stands now, though, is as long as your total protein intake is sufficient, you should be in a decent spot.
Great. A lot of questions about fasting and training, just to note that. Can you train high performance fasted, and how long before you need to refuel the body?
Yeah, you can certainly do that. I know of actually many athletes, some athletes that will do that, though the vast majority will not. As it gets higher and higher in intensity and or duration, it gets more challenging, but it really does come down to what you did the day before as well. So if you ate sufficient calories the day before, didn't train, and your glycogen stores are topped off, you have a fighting chance. Now, the duration part of that equation is really kind of dependent upon you. So are you really talking 30, 45 minutes, 60 minutes? You're probably fine. And whether you're out past that into several hours, you may not be. And then the only other comment I would make is keep in mind whenever you think about fasting and any other, let's say, against the textbook, quote unquote style, you really, really need to be careful in thinking the difference between can I do it and is it optimal? So I have absolutely no reason to think fasting like that would improve performance. I only work for the most part with people who are trying to perform at the highest level possible. So I can't think of a scenario in which I would go to fasting to try to enhance performance. So whether or not you can maintain some level of performance, probably. Will it provide any benefit? I struggle to find scenarios in which that would actually make you perform better.
How do different forms of carbohydrates impact performance? And then right below it, another question about carbohydrates, which is, does carbohydrate cycling work? So these are two questions from people that I think don't know one another, but a lot of questions about carbohydrates and performance, which we've touched on. Anything else that you want to add to that conversation?
I don't think maybe you might want to think about carb loading / carb cycling. So carbohydrate loading does help. However, a misconception there is it's just, a big bowl of pasta the night before. That can help top off storages, but really optimal carbohydrate loading prior to a long duration endurance performance is probably best over the course of 3 or 4 days. So you want to gradually increase carbohydrate intake for multiple days rather than just have one big bowl of pasta.
Branch chain amino acids and essential amino acid supplementation. Yay, nay, or as I would say, meh?
Meh, usually. If your total protein intake is fine, then you don't really have a need for them. If you're, for any number of valid reasons, total protein is not, then going to an essential amino acid would be my first step rather than a BCAA. Now, admittedly, we actually do use essential amino acids somewhat regularly because it's also sort of like there's no real harm other than if you're price conscious and you're sort of like, I'm wasting money. That's fine. The people I work with generally, again, that's not a few dollars to maximize. Recoveries is not that big. So we will sometimes use that pre, mid, or post training in some circumstances. Total protein would be a high quality whey, something like that. If you can't use whey for whatever reason, there are plenty of high quality vegan proteins you could use. If you want to top all that off though and add some essential amino acids, it wouldn't hurt anything and may potentially help slightly. So you choose based on that algorithm.
I was hoping somebody would ask this. We've touched on it a little bit. It's a little bit of a loaded question the way they phrased it. So at risk of leading the witness, does the mythical anabolic window really exist? And I'm just laughing because the way they posed the question, they're already telling us what their stance is. Making it more effective as to create hypertrophy, to eat within a certain time frame after working out. I'm going to assume that this person genuinely wants to know whether or not the anabolic window really exists or not, because they refer to it as mythical. I'm going to assume that they're suspicious, but what's the deal? Is the anabolic window a real thing?
The post-exercise anabolic window is extremely real. So what this is, you can see more detail in a number of videos on my YouTube page, I believe. It is the idea that you must consume some sort of nutrients, specifically, usually protein, in some time domain, 30 or 60 minutes post-exercise in order to maximize growth. So is that window real? Yes. Are you hypersensitized to nutrients in that time frame? Yes. Is it very important that you rehydrate, replenish muscle glycogen, and rebuild tissue quickly after exercise to maximize recovery? Absolutely. It's not real, though, in the sense that you have to have it within 30 minutes. In the case of protein, as we talked about a second ago, your total protein intake throughout the day is more important. Timing, though, for things like carbohydrate, especially if you're training multiple times a day, it is very real. So it is a very real thing. It's just you may or may not actually care about it. It may not be important for your context.
Garlic seems like an appropriate question. What, if any, functional roles does garlic have in performance?
Garlic's actually really cool. There's a number of things you can dive into that are outside of my 3 to 4 sentences, considering I'm at like 2.5 probably already. You're not going to find strong human data on garlic extract. However, there is a little bit suggesting it can actually enhance recovery from injury or potentially tissue damage. So you got to kind of be careful, though, because in order to understand what's happening, you have to differentiate between innate and adaptive recovery processes. And when we say things like immunity, realize, friends, that's not one thing. That's just like a very colloquial term for a number of things.
Again, it's a verb. Like
Totally.
It's a noun, right? The immune system, but immunity is a bunch of processes. If you're about to correct my speech, I'll correct yours right back. Not yours, Andy, but the listeners. Processes, tomato. It's a verb. Immunity is a verb.
This is my problem with immune boosters. Same issue, right? You're like, whoa, what are you boosting specifically? Because, in fact, if you're boosting the wrong part of immunity during the wrong phase of recovery with garlic, you may be actually hurting the process because you are theoretically could be trying to downregulate that portion so that you can upregulate a next portion. That's the faster way to say it, if you will. So you may see more data come out that says the garlic extract's overrated. I don't know. I actually don't even know yet. We just don't have enough human data on it. But yeah, there's some stuff there if you want to look hard enough.
I'm going to ask this question for myself because I'm curious to know the answer.
Selfish.
Tart cherry extract.
Pretty effective, actually, for two things, potentially aiding in getting to sleep, as well as muscle soreness. That's the bulk of the research is in muscle soreness and seems to be a moderate effect there.
I think for people that might be interested in dosages of things like tart cherry extract, garlic, etc., obviously Dr. Andy Galpin's Instagram and Twitter are great places to ask questions like that and to find answers to questions like that, as well as examine.com is a terrific website. They actually recently overhauled their entire website. So they have this human effect matrix that shows the the effects and the strength of different effects in human studies of many, many different compounds, relating to everything to, hormone health in men and women, sports performance, cognitive performance. It doesn't cover everything, but it certainly covers a lot with links to studies. There's a lot that's available at completely zero cost. By joining examine.com, you can access some additional features. And this is, by the way, not a paid endorsement from examine.com. I'm simply a longtime user of examine.com myself. And so I just want to cue people to it. And again, many of the resources there are available completely free of cost. It's a wonderful site. So for dosages of garlic, tart cherry extract, and things of that sort, whether or not you're getting it from food or you're getting it from extract powders, rather, all of that information is pretty nicely laid out there. So unless you have something to add to that, I was just going to cue people to that resource.
No, I've been using that since the first day that website was launched. I was made aware that it was coming. Been fortunate to know those guys for a while. So yeah, I've used it. I've used it in all my classes. I use it, I don't even know, probably weekly at this point. Another nice feature that's actually on there is they have a series of, like, they'll do some topical reviews, basically. So they'll write a big paper out on muscle damage or blood pressure
or testosterone enhancement, or hormone, menstrual cycle, and
yeah, PCOS. I think they do one on, and all kinds of stuff. So you can search by topic, like energy or recovery or whatever, or you can search by black cumin seed extract, or like whatever number of things you want to do. And they'll also tell you if there's any interactions to pay attention to. So it's really, really nice. So be careful if you're taking A and B or whatever. So yeah, it's wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, they've done a marvelous job. So thank you, examine.com. Keep up the amazing work. Well, we've come close to the end of this episode, and that means that we are close to the end of this series where you have so graciously joined us for 6 full episodes of the Huberman Lab podcast to educate us on all things fitness. Episode 1, you reviewed and educated us on assessing our level of fitness. In fact, I learned so many ways of assessing fitness that I had not thought about, and also assessing my recovery capacity, for instance. One thing that I'm definitely going to implement from that episode is a routine broad jump test and an in-home high jump and touch test. If people don't know what I'm referring to, that's all contained in that episode. It's time-stamped. These are very straightforward, zero-cost ways to assess one's level of fitness. There are a few others that require a bare minimum of technology, like taking your pulse rate in very specific ways at specific times. Also, some timing of mile runs and some other things related to strength and hypertrophy, and on and on. Really, it's a buffet of options that we can select from. And I already know the 4 or 5 that I've started implementing this week. I've recognized how I'm pretty good in a couple of areas. I'm doing maybe better than pretty well in one area, but that I'm doing abysmally poorly in a few areas that I just wasn't aware of. And so I've already started taking on ways to adjust that over time, and I'll keep people posted. So that first episode was absolutely incredible and just provides so much actionable knowledge and the rationale behind it. The second episode, you educated us about strength, speed, and hypertrophy training. And there too, an immense amount of incredible knowledge. We got way down into the details. You explained sets, reps, the rationale for sets, reps, rest, cadence, number of workouts per week. I'm definitely going to take away my need to do some speed-based training and some power-based training. Normally, I think in terms of strength or hypertrophy. And I'm relieved to learn that a lot of the speed and power-based training is low intensity enough that it can be done fairly often and incorporated into my program, which already touches on strength and hypertrophy and indeed some endurance work as well. So amazing tips that you provided there. I'm certainly going to implement the 3 to 5 program that you described, 3 to 5 exercises done for 3 to 5 repetitions, 3 to 5 minutes between sets. You're doing this 3 to 5 times per week, and so on and so forth. All the details, again, time-stamped in the Strength and Hypertrophy episode show notes. So just incredible.
We even used that to set up PR with you this week.
That's right. I did PR this week. Thanks to your input and following that program And I'm really grateful for that. It does feel good to break through a barrier. And I intend to break through more barriers, but not just with strength and hypertrophy, because episode 3, you taught us all about endurance, the 4 different forms of endurance, how to train for each of those different forms, the value of doing even very brief 20-second sprints or bouts of jumping jacks throughout the day, which to some people might just sound like a little hack or a gimmick, but no, these are actually tapping into fuel system